Welcome to the Multicultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. LaVerne Haynes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, and welcome to the Multicultural Mindset. Today, we're diving into a topic that affects every woman, but not always in the same way. That topic is menopause. There's a part that we don't really talk about enough, but research shows that women of color, especially Black women, experience menopausal, premenopausal, perimenopausal symptoms more intensely, more frequently, and for longer periods of time than white women. And that tells us that menopause is not a one-size-fits-all story. So to help us unpack these unique shades of menopause, I'm joined by Hope Whylie. She is a menopause coach. She is the CEO and founder of This.Is.Menopause. And she works with women navigating this very journey. Hope, thank you for being here today.
Thank
So
you for
glad to have
having me.
well, let me start with you. What drew you into supporting women through the menopause experience, and how did you just get into this and begin to notice even that there were racial or cultural differences?
Well, actually, it was interesting. I had a very, very dear friend who began experiencing menopause very early in life. She was actually 37, and which is a little bit early to start. And I traveled with her a lot because our sons were best friends and we would travel together to their games. And I noticed, she was truly suffering. We would stay overnight in hotels and she would have the air conditioner blasting, or she would, she just had lots and lots of different symptoms that at the time she had no idea what they were. She was having mood swings. So she went to her OBGYN because she says, I think I must be in menopause. She did recognize that her mom had had an early menopause. And she did go to her OBGYN, who told her unequivocally, you are not in menopause. You're only 37. It's too early, and began to treat her for the individual symptoms. In watching her, and then recalling some things that my own mother had gone through, um, to the degree that my mom almost had a hysterectomy because she was having symptoms that the doctors could not identify. And inevitably, when doctors could not identify what was wrong with the woman, if she was having abnormal bleeding, or anything that was related to her reproductive cycle, the first choice was, let's take out her uterus. Let's remove the uterus. That will solve the problems. And I watched my mother go through that as well. And so when my dear friend, as I watched that more and more, I realized that we weren't talking about it. Women weren't talking about it, or moms weren't talking about it to us. We weren't talking about it amongst ourselves as women. And so I thought that it was a clarion call. We need to do something. We need to begin to have some conversations. And so that's when I started just really having conversations with women. I started talking with them, interviewing them about menopause and their experiences.
Wow. So this is born out of your observations around women of color struggling and not finding the best answers. You mentioned that your friend started menopause very young. I did some research as I knew we were going to be talking about this today, and the stats from the study of women's health across the nation. They call it SWAN. You're probably very
Mhm.
familiar with that. SWAN's study shows that Black women reach natural menopause roughly 8.5 months earlier than white women. They say 52.17 years versus 52.88 years. That doesn't seem like a lot, but I imagine that within that range, there are those extremes like your friend at 37. That's really on the earlier side of the spectrum. Um, they also say that while the average menopause symptom duration is about 6.5 years for non-Hispanic white women, Black women go through the symptoms like the hot flashes and night sweats and stuff for about 10 years. Now, that is a significant disparity there. What have you learned about the nature of that disparity physiologically? The night sweats. Now, you know what? I should actually ask you to start with some of the physiological symptoms. Start there. And then why is it that women of color experience them for so much longer?
Yeah, I it's actually what when we think about it, we as women of color, unfortunately, the scales are never balanced. Oftentimes, first in talking about the symptoms, if you go with the Menopause Society, which is, and it used to be the North American Menopause Society, and that's kind of the body here in the United States that follows and has done a lot of research on menopause, they're listing 34 symptoms. And the symptoms can be anything. The thing that most women will say if they did not have a hot flash or they did not have a night sweat, they say, "Oh, I didn't go through menopause. I didn't go through perimenopause." And I chuckle because, yeah, you did go through it. There are upwards of 34, 37, 40, 50, depending on where you look and who you talk to. Menopause affects our body from head to toe. It affects our hair, the texture, the quality of our hair, the thinness of our hair. It affects our skin. A lot of women will have adult acne. And they'll say, "Oh my gosh, I have acne. This is like when I was a teenager." Well, that's because you're going through a hormonal change, just like you did when you were a teenager. We all talk about hot flashes. We all talk about night sweats. Things as simple as, the flow of electricity in your body. You go to touch your car and you get shocked and that's menopause. The weight gain, that's the common one that most people see. I'm doing the same thing I've always done, but yet I'm gaining weight, typically in the middle. And that's happening because the estrogen in your body is fighting to stay in that reproductive area. So when you look at the fact that estrogen is in every cell from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet, it affects
Mhm.
everything, every part of our body. Joint pains, menopause, depression, anxiety, menopause. So, or perimenopause as you go into it. So, a lot of women, and unfortunately, are so misinformed because we believe that if we don't have a hot flash or we don't have a night sweat, we didn't have menopause. Additionally, doctors are poorly trained. Physicians are poorly trained to treat menopause. The studies say that 1 in 5 doctors have had, any real training in menopause, and doctors say that they need much, much more training because they have no idea how to handle it.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, you go to the doctor, and the most common thing that I hear women say is, "I don't feel like myself anymore." And when they go to the doctor and they say that, and the doctor says, "Well, tell me what's going on." And they say, "Well, I'm just not myself. I don't have any pep in my step, blah, 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 blah." And the doctor
Mhm.
does what? They prescribe something for depression and anxiety.
Mhm.
And so consistently women are treated in that way. Now, why is it that Black women in particular seem to have an extended amount of perimenopause, time frame of menopause? Well, for the same reasons that Black women have everything, and we have disparities in everything, as sad as it is. There's some genetics to it, environmental and social factors that we encounter that our white counterpart does not. Stress, discrimination, okay, those things affect us because they affect our cortisol levels.
Mhm.
We know stress affects cortisol, cortisol affects everything and creates negative, impact on our body. Healthcare disparities. Just as it does in anything else, we have the same disparities. We also are the caretakers in our household. We take care of our children and our spouses and our mothers and the neighborhood. And so we bear way more burden and don't have the time to pamper and soothe and deal with these symptoms of menopause. And then a lot of Black women go into surgical menopause because if they have had fibroids. As I
Mhm.
mentioned before, the common way to deal with fibroids was to remove the uterus. And so they go into surgical menopause or early menopause because oftentimes they would not only take, they would take the ovaries as well. And so some, women would go into full-blown menopause. So why? Because we're Black.
Mm. What you speak of, I hear two things. I hear weathering, but then I also hear the medical racism. So,
Absolutely.
weathering, let's define that. Weathering is what you were speaking of when you mentioned the chronic stress and the socioeconomic disadvantages and the oppression, how the caregiver burdens that actually accelerate health decline
Mhm.
in women of color, racism, all the things that cumulatively have an adverse impact on our neurological systems, on our hormonal systems, literally every system in our body is affected by stress.
Mhm.
And we hear so often, well, it's things have gotten so much better for people of color now. I don't know what the real issue is, what the real deal is, but yet we are living proof that the impact of all of these cultural and racial disparities affects every cell in our body,
That's right.
every cell in our body. So we can't look at menopause again with a one size fits all kind of a mindset. This you
Mhm.
have to have a multicultural mindset. So if you're a counselor, if you're a physician, a social worker, you got to look at who's in front of you. And
That's
what do
right.
you see? When you see a woman who's between 45 and 65, she's in the range. She's in the range for perimenopause. So
That's
we
right.
want to be we want to be mindful of that to consider from a physical perspective, a medical perspective, that the experiences and the features of this stage of life are normative in some ways, but extreme for women of color.
Absolutely.
When you said that sometimes people would say I didn't go through menopause, you would kind of, it's like saying, oh, I never went through teenage years. I was never a teenager. You, yes. Okay, just because maybe you didn't go through extreme rebellion, just because maybe you didn't have, if you're a woman, a girl, maybe you didn't have painful periods, but you were still a teenager. So if
Absolutely.
you are in that time frame from 45 to 65, you may experience, or even a little, you said 37 in your friend's case. Doesn't mean you're not in the stage of life, but the experiences and features, the way you experience it, the way your body adapts. There are a lot of social environmental factors that relate to that. So I say all that to ask this next question. Why is it important for us to understand the treatment disparities for relieving these hormonal transitions? If Black women are experiencing these challenges with a higher severity of these different systemic things in their bodies, are there systemic barriers misunderstandings? How can these things be addressed in terms of treatment? You provide coaching, for instance.
Mhm. Right, right.
Tell us about that.
Absolutely. I think that the approach has to be um, multifactorial. Okay, so it has to be that you look at a woman holistically. You cannot treat depression alone. You cannot treat anxiety alone. You cannot look at it and say you're having thinning hair, so I'm going to give you this medication for that, or skin. You have
Mhm.
to look at the entire woman because the
Okay.
entire body is going through mentally, physically, emotionally. All of these are factors. And so I think that the approach has to be for mental health professionals. If a woman comes in and she's saying, I'm all over the place, I can't think, I'm not, it's not necessarily that she is dealing with a specific mental health issue. It may just very well be that she is dealing with perimenopause. And so it has to be addressed in a very holistic manner. I think again, as you mentioned, um, Black women, there's a huge healthcare disparity. They believe we're stronger. We can carry a greater burden. We don't need medication because we can withstand pain much, much, much more so than anybody else.
Mhm.
So when you look at all of those things, and the medical racism, as we know, is alive and well, as practitioners, whether it is a mental health practitioner, whether you're looking at medical doctors, we have to begin to examine all of the factors. What is going on in your life? And let's keep a log of, what's happening here. What is this how often does this happen? Did you feel that mood swing? And then start helping women to deal with it more holistically, and respond in manners that does not necessarily say that it has to be, we're going to give you a prescription.
Mhm. Tell us about what you do to provide those holistic supports. And this is menopause. Tell us about your services. What you do.
We provide coaching. And so I typically start as I talk with women, and they will inevitably, I don't care where I go. I don't care what table I sit at. I don't care what environment it is in. Someone is going to say, oh, they'll either pull a fan out, there's always a fan, or they may mention, my hair, I've got issues with my hair is thinning. And so that's the opening for a conversation about menopause for me. And so as we start that conversation, so tell me a little bit more about what's going on. And so I typically have a questionnaire, and it's got lots and lots and lots and lots of questions because there are lots and lots and lots and lots of issues that we have when we're encountering menopause. So we
Mhm.
start with the questionnaire as far as the specific things that are happening. What symptoms are you feeling? And sometimes there's symptoms on there that they have no idea is even a symptom of
Mm,
menopause. And so
mm,
as they go through, first, for a lot of women, it's helping them to recognize that they're actually in perimenopause.
wow.
It's something that's one thing that I found is a lot of women don't want to accept that
Mm,
because our society says that when you're, perimenopausal, when you're in menopause, in that stage of life, that you're old and you're useless and you should be thrown away, and
mm,
particularly here in the United States. And so, as a result of that, getting women to a point where they first acknowledge that maybe I am perimenopausal, and then we can move towards how we can manage it.
yeah. So I won't say problem identification, but reality check.
Yeah,
You're in this stage of life.
yeah,
Now it's unlike most 12 year olds want to be teenagers,
right.
but most 45-year olds don't want to be menopausal.
That's right. And
At
it's
the
our
same
second
time,
spring. We
we
call it
want
a
to live
second
longer.
spring.
Second spring. Second
Yeah.
spring. I love that term. Tell us about that metaphor. How do you bring that to life for women?
It's actually a Japanese translation for the second phase of life. Our teenage years was our first spring. When we, were blossoming and we were blooming and our hormones were readying us for, childbirth and for all the things that come. Well, this is our second spring. And we're readying for a whole new phase of life where we can embrace our maturity, our beauty, our womanhood in a different way. We're no longer childbearing, but we also very free because we don't have the limitations that we had. So
Mhm.
it's a second spring, a second being having an opportunity to just blossom a second time.
I love that. And the beauty of that metaphor is that you can choose what that new blossoming is going to look like. You can choose how you want to live. Choice, as you said,
Yes,
you can make conscientious choices to make the most of this season um, in life. And I think the message there with spring, we always think about we're looking forward in spring. We're looking forward to summer. We're looking forward to the beautiful flowers. We're looking forward to the garden. When we
hmm
get to what you're describing here as a second spring, we sometimes think that there is nothing to look forward to.
hmm
And that's not the case. I
not
love how
at
you
all.
use that. I love how you bring that to life. So today we've talked about some of the physiological symptoms, some of the reasons why women of color experience uh, greater symptoms, experience them, I'll say experience greater features of menopause. And I'm trying to be careful with my word usage there because symptoms sound like the concept sound like there is a a problem, like there is some pathology, the body is doing something it's not supposed to do. But if we really are honest, the body is doing what it is supposed to do. But it's just so different that the adjustment to the season becomes sometimes difficult to understand or tolerate. Menopause is natural. If you live long enough, it's natural. So there's a level of acceptance that has to, I think, take place if a person is going to um, enjoy and embrace and get through it without without complaining about what it means, and without the fear and the anxiety
Right,
of the
right.
of the experience itself. So we've talked about the physiological components today. We're going to come back next week for part two, and we're going to talk about the relational components, the social components, how we see ourselves, self-image, how we present, what we envision for our lives as women in this age range, and how those who help, counselors, pastors, social workers, others, how others can help with the embrace and the acceptance and perpetuate joy rather than sorrow over where I am in life, where I
hmm
can find the good and not just the complaints. And we're going to talk about that from a psychosocial perspective. So I thank you so much for being here today. This has been a rich conversation. I'm sure that folks who have tuned in have learned a lot. Um, we are continuing next week to still talk about this from a multicultural mindset. So as we unpack these unique shades of menopause, Hope is going to come back and share more. So thank you for being with us today, Hope, and thank you to all the folks who've tuned in. And remember, we are practicing our trade. If we're counselors, teachers, social workers, we're practicing with cultural intelligence, cultural humility, and a multicultural mindset. So long for now.